Hello everyone, welcome to the show. We've got a fascinating topic today, money, but not just any money. We're talking about a time when money was literally backed by gold. That's right, the gold standard. And I promise it's not as boring as it sounds. I mean, we're talking about a system that made gold the Beyonce of economics. Everybody wanted and everybody needed.
And today, we're gonna break it down for you. Where it came from, how it worked, and why it's not longer in place. So, let's get into it.
Century, the gold standard became the foundation of global trade and finance. It was a way to ensure that money had real value and wasn't just paper.
But why gold? Why not silver or, I don't know, diamonds?
Actually, that's a great question. Gold has been historically valuable because it doesn't corrode and it's rare but not that rare. We all know that it has been used for making coins and bars, and also it has been widely accepted by a lot of civilizations, and it was just natural for backing currencies. So why did countries love this system so much?
The main reason was stability. When a currency is tied to gold, governments can just print money whenever. That one, unlike today, well, that helped control inflation and made international trade more predictable.
Wait, so does it mean that government can print as much money as they want today?
Well, pretty much under the gold standard, every dollar or pound needed to have an equivalent in gold. That way, governments couldn't just create money out of thin air.
So how did it really work in practice?
Well, it was actually pretty simple. If you had a bill, you could take into a bank and exchange it for actual gold. Banks and governments had a massive gold reserves to ensure they could honor these exchanges.
Okay, so central banks played a huge role in regulating the money supply to ensure that they had enough to pay for.
But also, what impact did the system have globally?
Oh, well, it created one of the most stable financial periods in history. Between 1870 and 1914, the world economy flourished under what's known as the classical gold standard era. Low inflation, steady growth, and expanding trade.
Well, that sounds amazing. But did it ever cause problems?
It did. A major example of it was the Great Depression, since many economists believe that it really made it worse because governments had their hands tied and couldn't just increase the availability of money, and that really made countries struggle.
And what about wars? Did it survive to those?
Not really. During World War I, many countries abandoned the gold standard because they needed to print more money to fund the war. Some trying to return to it later, but by 1930s, most countries had permanently moved away from it. So, what led to its ultimate downfall?
Well, actually, several things: economic shocks, wars, and financial crisis. Countries needed more flexibility to adjust their economies, and the gold standard didn't allow that. By the mid 20th century, most economies had fully transitioned to what we now call fiat money. This is a currency that isn't backed up by a physical commodity, but instead relies on government trust.
That really makes sense, but are there any countries that are still using it today?
Not really, but some politicians and economists argue that bringing it back could help prevent excessive government spending and inflation too. The biggest challenge with the gold standard? Strictness. Economies need flexibility, especially during crisis. When everything was tied to gold, governments couldn't print more money to help during recessions. That's why the Great Depression was so brutal. Countries stuck to gold when they need to stimulate their economies.
Exactly, and let's not forget, there just is not enough gold match today's global economic. If we went back to gold, the money supply will scream dramatically, causing deflation and economic chaos. Plus, minimum war isn't not exactly quick or easy.
But what if a country like China or Russia made a move toward gold backed currency? That could shift the balance of economic power. And let's not forget, some people see Bitcoin as the new digital gold. A fixed supply, decentralized, maybe that's the future.
Whoa, Bitcoin is the new gold standard? That's a whole other discussion. But for now, it seems like the gold standard is more of a golden memory. But still, who knows? The world is full of surprises. Were there any other important players in the gold standard?
Absolutely. Aside from governments and central banks, international financial institutions like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve played major roles in maintaining stability and managing gold reserves.
And let's not forget gold producing nations. Countries like South Africa, Canada, and Australia were crucial because their gold mines supplied the reserves that backed the national currencies.
So it wasn't just government. Many different players shaped the world standard. That's fascinating.
Let's take a quick look at the timeline. 1819, Gold Standard. The implementation of Gold Standard established a monetary system where the value of the country currency was directly linked to a specific amount of gold. It means the UK adoption. 1914, Classical Gold Standard Era. This period marked the widespread adoption of the gold standard, providing stability to international trade and finance. However, the Great War led to eventual decline, which led to the collapse in the 30s. Then there appeared the next standard that we know.
Now let's compare gold standard with today's fiat money.
Gold standard was rigid but stable, and fiat money or nowadays money allows more flexibility but also can lead to more inflation.
And central banks today have more control over monetary policy compared to when the gold dictated money supply.
So, while the gold standard had its advantages, modern economies rely on adaptability to respond to crises, and that's a wrap. To get an even deeper understanding, we spoke with an expert on this topic, Edgar Lozano, an economist specializing in monetary systems. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
En términos muy generales, el patrón oro es simplemente la fijación del valor de la moneda conforme a un recurso tangible específico, en este caso el oro. Ahora, el patrón oro, además, funcionaba como un mecanismo disciplinario, ¿no? Limitaba la expansión monetaria y aseguraba que la oferta de dinero estuviera respaldada por un bien tangible. Sin embargo, en el siglo XX, los gobiernos encontraron que cada vez más difícil operar bajo esas restricciones, ¿no? Especialmente cuando buscaban expandir el gasto público o responder a crisis económicas con un mayor grado de flexibilidad. Históricamente la Gran Depresión y posteriormente con la caída del sistema de Bretton Woods en los años 70, pues dejaron claro que los gobiernos preferían un sistema donde la política monetaria estuviera menos. Con el patrón oro, los gobiernos ganaron un cierto margen de maniobra, ¿no? Que además no tenía ningunos precedentes respecto al tema de la política monetaria. La introducción de un tipo de cambio flotante, ¿no? Lo contrario a un tipo de cambio fijo, y la expansión del papel de los bancos centrales, pues permitieron responder efectivamente con mayor rapidez a crisis económicas. Sin embargo, pues esta flexibilidad también abrió la puerta a una mayor discrecionalidad en la creación de dinero. Y ello ha derivado pues, en ciclos recurrentes de inflación, burbujas financieras, crisis de deuda. Entonces, en esencia, se cambió un sistema basado en restricciones naturales por uno basado en la confianza en que las autoridades ejercerán su poder de manera prudente. Si el propósito es dotar a los gobiernos de más herramientas para gestionar la economía en el corto plazo, sin duda se ha conseguido, ¿no? Pero si el objetivo era garantizar estabilidad monetaria y preservar el poder adquisitivo a largo plazo, los resultados han sido pues, menos alentadores. La inflación se ha convertido en un fenómeno estructural. Los ciclos económicos parecen amplificarse en lugar de atenuarse y la confianza en las monedas fiduciarias es un tema pues, recurrente de debate. No, digo, es altamente improbable. No solo porque los gobiernos han desarrollado una gran dependencia a la expansión monetaria, sino porque la cantidad de oro disponible difícilmente podría respaldar la oferta monetaria actual, ¿no? Sin que ello implicara ajustes drásticos en el sistema financiero. Además, la política monetaria moderna se basa en la manipulación de tipos de interés y agregados monetarios. Y son herramientas que sean extremadamente difíciles, o sea, limitadas bajo un régimen de patrón oro. Como que en ese contexto, un regreso al patrón oro implicaría un rediseño del sistema financiero, un rediseño profundo y algo que, francamente, en términos políticos sería muy difícil de implementar.
That was really insightful. It's fascinating how something that once ruled global finance still holds relevance today.
That brings us to our next segment. So, is gold still important today?
Absolutely. Even though no country uses the gold standard, central banks still keep gold reserves as a safety measure. Gold is considered a safe haven investment. When economies became unstable, people tended to buy gold.
And I also read that countries like the United States and China hoard massive amounts of gold. It's still a key player in global finance.
Plus, with recent economic crisis, many investors are investing in gold because it holds its value better than paper money.
So, in a way, gold never really lost its sparkle.
Exactly.
A really interesting case study is what occurred on August 15, 1971, when President Nixon decided that the US would leave the gold standard. This happened mainly because of the Bretton Woods system and how it really pegged the US dollar to gold. But by the late 1960s, the US government was spending a lot of money, which led to inflation and affected the confidence people and countries had in the dollar. So fearing this devaluation, everyone just began to exchange their dollars for gold, which also made the US reserves pass from 20,000 tons in 1950s to less than 9,000 tons in 1971. For this reason, in 1971, the US dollar became a fiat currency, which means that it was only backed by government trust, which allowed them to gain more control over their own monetary policy and allowed them also to adjust their interest rates. However, this also had consequences, and this led to a high inflation during the 1970s, being the highest 11% during 1974, for which the Federal Reserve had to raise their interest rates, reaching or even at 20% in 1980s, hoping just to stop these negative statistics. And well, even though this decision was controversial, Nixon's decision changed all the global financial system, granting greater monetary policies, flexibility, and also which motivated other countries to start to follow this and transition to fiat currencies, which are the ones that we are still using nowadays.
Well, that was fun. We learned so much today.
Yes, the gold standard was a fascinating system with a lot of advantages, but also disadvantages.
And even though it's gone, its influence is still felt in today's financial world.
Thank you all for watching.
Stay rich in knowledge, folks.
See you next time.
Bye!
Yo siento que sí, porque aparte no hay tanto ruido.
¿Me estás escuchando, Daniel Valencia?
Un patrocinio.
Se cayó. Déjalo aquí.
Ok.
Yo creo que sí se ve.
Sacarlo para
Y
el
le vas a decir.
Ya sí.
Sí, sí.
Ay, mira, habíamos tenido una bolsa atrás.
Sí.
Help it, control. No.
Gracias, sí.
So how did it really work in practice?
Y ves tú. No, pero no se escucha, no se escucha. Confiamos en el micro. No lo escuché. Listo, ya.
Ay, la ventana.
Jair, ya papá, ya.